What's happening, y'all? Corey Buschlen of Fantasy Stock Exchange coming at you to break down the Week 6 slate of DFS. As I do every Monday, I recap all of the DFS winning lineups from both the Sunday Million contest on FanDuel and the DraftKings Millionaire Maker contest on DraftKings and talk about their lineup construction, how they stacked certain games, where they spent up, where they spent down, certain chalky plays versus non-chalky plays. All that stuff will be covered in this video. As always, I'll go over some of my own lineups. I actually did win a little bit of money this week, so a little bit more exciting than usual. So if you guys want my lineup advice, of course, you can go to the Draft Sharks website. You can tune into my weekly GPP lineup advice article for DraftKings and for FanDuel. I give my best picks. Some of those guys definitely smashed this week. Some of those guys not so much. Now, without further ado, I'm going to talk about DraftKings first. I talked about FanDuel first last week, so we'll start with DraftKings this week. On DraftKings, we have Bull Nasty, who ended up winning the Millionaire Maker. Congrats to him. And a very peculiar lineup build. For what for my money, I think he did build it a little bit weird, but it ended up working out, obviously. So let's start with where he kind of spent up. Obviously, the chalky plays, he did eat the chalk on some of these 6,000 running backs. A lot of people were on the Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, DeAndre Swift, Antonio Gibson. Of course, some of these backup running backs were around that price range as well. Chuba Hubbard and some of those guys. So these guys were considered the chalk for a reason. They were expected to get big workloads, but they weren't overly high priced like Austin Eckler and Dalvin Cook. So he did eat the chalk at running back with Jonathan Taylor and with Joe Mixon. That caused him to get different in other places. So when we look at his wide receiver core, obviously CeeDee Lamb and Adam Thielen, not necessarily, shots in the dark. Those guys have been productive in the past, but they were low owned because they were projected to be in tough matchups. So definitely a smart move by him to take advantage of the fact that those guys were in tough matchups. Their ownership was suppressed as a result of that. But when we look at what he actually stacked, he took Baker Mayfield and Donovan Peoples-Jones and he stacked those guys together. Now, obviously, Baker Mayfield missing and the fact that he didn't really achieve a high ceiling meant that he had to hit big in other places of his lineup. But Donovan Peoples-Jones at 29.1 fantasy points on DraftKings at sub 1% ownership is a phenomenal hit by him. Obviously, stacking him with Baker Mayfield was a cherry on top. Noah Fant, a guy that was featured in my FanDuel article, not in my DraftKings article, but on FanDuel specifically, his price point was just too good to pass up for me. 81%, 86%, and 91% of his routes the last 3 games leading up to this week. It was only a matter of time for Noah Fant before he actually had a blow-up game. So the fact that this guy caught on to it, I actually didn't take my own advice on FanDuel. I never actually played Noah Fant, but he was a guy that I really liked. I just ended up going with different people in my tight end spot because I liked those guys better. But overall, Noah Fant, great call on his part. The one thing that I will say is that he played 2 tight ends, right? He did have Kelsey in his flex spot, which I don't think was a bad play at all because Kelsey's price point was lower than it usually is for Travis Kelce. And when you compared him to the flex options, the other running backs and wide receivers, it made sense to play Travis Kelce. It was supposed to be a high-paced game, high-scoring game. And Travis Kelce was a guy, while highly owned, was at a good price point for you to eat the chalk there. So not an overly exciting game out of Travis Kelce, but nonetheless, he did pay off to some degree. So overall, great strategy by Bull Nasty. Again, a little bit of a peculiar build with 2 tight ends. Only one stack that he ended up going with Mayfield and Peoples-Jones. Didn't really stack a whole lot of games overall, just a lot of singles, a lot of one-offs. Now let's move on to my lineups. And I didn't actually play in the Millionaire Maker on DraftKings. I only did one DraftKings lineup, and I played in a GPP. It was like a $20 entry, and it was like 8,000 people in the field. So looking at my lineup, again, I did cash. I tripled my money in this one. So I was inside the top 600 or so, 550 of the final standings. And what I did when I was constructing this lineup, and of course, you guys would have read that I really loved Matthew Stafford this week at 7.9% ownership. That actually came in lower than I thought it was going to be. I thought he would be like 10 to 15% owned, and I was willing to be okay with that. But the fact that he was sub 10% was definitely a big hit for me. Again, much like the guy who won the Millionaire Maker, I did eat the chalk a little bit at running back. Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift, 2 guys that I knew were going to be highly owned, but I needed to get them into my lineup regardless because I really like the spot that they were in. Of course, we know that the volume was there for those guys, and in Swift's case specifically, the receiving volume. So overall, I did end up having to eat the chalk at running back. At wide receiver, I stacked Cooper Kupp with Matthew Stafford. I ran Brandon Cooks back on the other side with kind of like a mini stack, Jonathan Taylor and Brandon Cooks in that Texans-Colts game. I thought if those guys were this game was gonna be high scoring, I figured those guys were gonna be a big reason for that. Obviously, Cooks didn't score any touchdowns or anything, but the 9 receptions in a full PPR format definitely served me well. Now, at the tight end position, I played Evan Ingram because I wanted to pivot away from Ricky Seals-Jones. I knew Ricky Seals-Jones was going to be like 30, 40% owned, 25% at minimum. So I played Evan Ingram at a similar price point. Ricky Seals-Jones was 3,000 on DraftKings. Evan Ingram was 3,400. So the reason I played him was because he was very low owned, 2% owned. And if Ricky Seals-Jones missed and Evan Ingram hit, then obviously that would have separated me big time from the field, because anybody who played RSJ probably didn't play Evan Ingram as well. So that was the reasoning behind that. It didn't work out. It could have worked out. If it did work out, I would have finished a lot better than 518th that I ended up finishing. And the one thing that I wanted to say closing out this lineup was that I did actually make a late swap. And for those of you that don't know what a late swap is, it's when you watch the 1 o'clock games and you realize, hey, I need more upside in my lineup, or I need to fade the chalk because my chalk picks didn't hit or something like that. So what I ended up noticing going into the 4 p.m. games was that my chalky picks hit and some of my non-chalky picks didn't, like Evan Ingram. So what I needed to do was differentiate my lineup a little bit more, because I initially had Kareem Hunt in my flex spot and Rondale Moore in my wide receiver spot. And looking back on the ownership, they were about 40% owned for Kareem Hunt and like 8% owned for Rondale Moore. So what I did was late swap to Odell Beckham and Chase Edmonds, because I knew they were going to be lower owned. Chase Edmonds, of course, falling right into a price range with all those backup running backs, Khalil Herbert, Darrell Williams, Chuba Hubbard, all those guys. Nobody was going to play Chase Edmonds coming into this game with a shoulder injury when all of those other running backs were projected to get more volume. So why I pivoted to Chase Edmonds was for that reason. Again, it didn't really work out. He only scored 8 points, but Odell Beckham Jr., 12.9 points, pivot away from Rondale Moore was definitely a good call. And Chase Edmonds actually did outscore Kareem Hunt. So overall, good call on the late swap. I did end up winning some money on that one. Now, moving on to the Sunday Million winner, of course, Mimi of 3 is the one that actually ended up winning this contest. As you guys can see, he did stack Dak Prescott with CeeDee Lamb, also played the Cowboys defense. I guess he was, coming into this game, he was figuring it was going to be a big win for the Cowboys. They were going to score a lot of points. They did end up scoring a lot of points, and they did get some turnovers and, of course, a defensive touchdown by Trevon Diggs. So that definitely paid off for the Cowboys defense side of things. And, of course, Dak and CeeDee Lamb, very low owned relative to expectation of that offense, but Dak Prescott 4% and CeeDee Lamb 8%, definitely a great play there. Again, this guy did eat the chalk at running back, which is a common theme. Darrell Henderson and Khalil Herbert, both guys that were going to be highly owned. Darrell Henderson actually was a pretty high price point, so I'm a little surprised he ended up coming in at 22.4%, because he was a lot higher than some of the Khalil Herberts and Darrell Williams that we knew were going to get volume, but weren't going to get to the volume point necessarily that Darrell Henderson gets. So at the wide receiver position, Adam Thielen, again, a very under-owned play that was very good this week. Again, coming into this game, Carolina had been very good against wide receivers, so a lot of people pivoted away from Adam Thielen. If they played a Vikings receiver, it was probably Justin Jefferson, and Adam Thielen ended up being the guy that was the very valuable piece in this offense. Cooper Kupp, of course, smashed in this game as well. Ricky Seals-Jones, 12.4% is very surprising to me that Ricky Seals-Jones was only 12.4% owned in the Sunday Million contest, because on DraftKings, he was 3K. So he was the min price on DraftKings, and he ended up being the highest owned tight end on the slate, obviously, at that price point. So Ricky Seals-Jones a little bit higher priced on FanDuel, so it led people away from him a little bit more. So not bad there to play Ricky Seals-Jones at only 12.4%. I think that's a fine number to eat the chalk on. Of course, Jonathan Taylor, another chalky running back. So overall, congrats to Mimi of 3. Again, not a lot of correlation in his lineup overall, but he did play Dak Prescott. He did play CeeDee Lamb in the Cowboys defense. And then he also played 2 Rams with Darrell Henderson and Cooper Kupp. Didn't choose to run it back in any kind of situation like that. But as you notice, he kind of took a stance on these games. He was like, the Cowboys are going to score a lot of points in this game. I'm going to stack the Cowboys offense and defense to score a lot of points. And then same with the Rams. They're going to blow out the Giants. So I'm going to play a couple of Rams that I think are going to score well. And that's basically what he did. So moving on to my lineups on FanDuel. And on FanDuel, I definitely wasn't as lucky as I was on DraftKings. I didn't actually cash in this lineup, and there's for a couple of reasons, right? So going over this lineup in general, you can see that I didn't hit a whole lot of ceiling, right? I have Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill, and I thought that was going to be the source of my ceiling. I thought those guys were going to go, Mahomes is going to go for 35 points. Hill's going to go for 30 points. I'm going to get a good source of ceiling out of those guys. I didn't choose to run it back in that game. I just thought the Chiefs were going to outclass the Washington football team. And that is what ended up happening. But Tyreek Hill overall wasn't as involved as we wanted him to be at the price point that he was at and at the ownership he was at, with a 22% play, and same with Mahomes at 19%. So at running back, of course, I did get different by playing Zeke Elliott. I really loved him this week as a play to get different at running back, because a lot of people were going to surpass him for Joe Mixon's, Jonathan Taylor's, and DeAndre Swift's. I knew his ownership was going to be low. Didn't necessarily hit a huge ceiling because he didn't get into the end zone, but had he gotten into the end zone, that would have been a huge differentiator on my part. Definitely didn't work out. Khalil Herbert, again, was a very chalky play, but he did end up kind of hitting what you expected him to do. Odell Beckham Jr., again, not a high ceiling option. I'm probably going to stay away from him going forward in DFS because he's kind of burned me one too many times now. Robbie Anderson was a shot in the dark. 4.8% ownership was actually a lot higher than I expected. I thought he'd be like a 1% owned guy. And he ended up scoring a touchdown and got like 11 targets, but he just wasn't effective overall. Dropped the ball quite a bit. And TJ Hawkinson was one of my favorite plays on FanDuel because I knew the recency bias was going to catch up with a lot of people. They weren't going to want to play TJ Hawkinson because he'd been a guy that wasn't very involved in his offense the past couple of weeks. And I knew that was just only a matter of time because the routes were there, snaps were there, and all that stuff. So TJ Hawkinson, again, didn't smash necessarily, which is the theme with this whole lineup. Had a couple guys scored touchdowns in this lineup because, I mean, I only scored like 3 touchdowns overall across the course of this entire lineup. This one would have been a lot better, but a couple guys just kind of had floor games, which is not what you want in a GPP tournament. Maybe it works out for you in cash games, but in tournaments, you need ceiling and you need guys to score touchdowns, especially on FanDuel, which is a half PPR format. Now, moving on to my final lineup of the week. This was actually in the Joe Holka Listener League. Of course, like a 2,000 field tournament, 1,828 people that were in this. Just a $5 tournament. It's completely rake free. So I decided to join it. And I played the Matthew Stafford Cooper Kupp stack that I played on DraftKings. He was my favorite play at quarterback this week. I had, I think, three shares of Matthew Stafford overall in my DFS lineups. In this game, in this lineup, I definitely could not pick a running back to save my life. I played Devontae Booker. I thought even if they were behind, he was going to catch a lot of passes. And Austin Eckler, I also thought was a good pay up. Didn't pay off for me. And as you guys can see, overall, I also played Keenan Allen. The Chargers just getting wiped was not something I expected to happen. I thought, if anything, they were going to be the ones that were going to win this game handedly compared to the way that the Ravens won this game. So definitely a miscalculation on my part. Brandon Cooks was a guy that I really liked this week. Cole Kmet also was a guy that I sneakily liked this week because the routes and the targets and the usage had been there for him as well, but he hadn't yet scored a touchdown, hadn't been overly involved. He actually almost got like a carry on like the 5-yard line, which would have gotten him into the end zone and been a great play for me. 0.2% drafted would have been a phenomenal hit if he would have scored a touchdown in that game. But overall, again, this lineup, a couple ceiling plays, but not a lot of consistency overall. I either hit big or I missed on a lot of these players. And the Vikings defense, another one that I was touting as a great play this week. So glad I hit on that. So that's all, guys. Make sure if you do enjoy this video, if you do enjoy Draft Sharks content in general, go ahead to the bottom of the video, hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel. If you are new, make sure you tune in for next week's DFS articles. They will be live around Friday or Saturday, and we hope to win some money next week. So peace out, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.